Hello, my name is Alicia Sterling, and I will be talking about my research topic. I'll be talking briefly about the background information, some key primary source evidence, and the historical significance of my topic, which is titled, quote, Immigration and Education, what the bilingual education debate in the 1980s taught us about the rise of conservatism in the United States, end quote. Before that, I will share the research question and thesis of my project so that the greater purpose may be understood. After some researching, my research question came to be, quote, during the 1980s, how did Fairfax County Public Schools handle the issue of non-English speaking students through their response to the debate over bilingual education versus English as a second language education? And what does this reveal about the larger political history at the time, as well as the general attitude towards immigration, end quote. And in furthering my research while asking myself this question, my thesis now stands as, quote, through the examination of the debate over bilingual education and implementation of ESL in 1980s Fairfax County, the social issues and movements of the 1980s, namely the rise of conservatism and the Chicano movement, can be better understood, as well as highlight the negative sentiment towards immigration at the time. I will now go over some background information regarding bilingual education. In the late 1960s, the U.S. Congress passed the Bilingual Education Act, which came as a shock to states as the U.S. government generally did not support non-English usage in schools and had rarely been involved in language legislation. Although the act was authorized, there was a lack of guidelines and no stated purpose in the act. As a result, in the early 1970s, there was a discussion over the act and how there was a lack of goals in the program, which led to the act being reauthorized and expanded in 1974. Afterwards, in the 1980s, which is the decade I am focusing on, there was a developing base of opposition towards bilingual education as an age of conservatism was rising and heightened with the election of Ronald Reagan to the presidency. In Northern Virginia in the 1980s, there was a large influx of Latino immigrants into the area that led to the federal government's push for bilingual education in Fairfax County, and then the subsequent pushback from the state. Through the Mary Ann Lecko's papers that consist of FCPS correspondence between FCPS officials and employees, some proposed rules for English learning programs, as well as education journal articles speaking against bilingual education, it is apparent how FCPS perceived bilingual education and why they opted against it. These documents suggest that the main concern over bilingual education was due to the cost of the program and protecting states' control over education, as they wanted to limit the federal government's interference. For example, then Virginia Attorney General Marshall Coleman stated, quote, local school officials know the needs of their students better than the federal government. They should be permitted to create their own solutions, end quote. This statement emphasizes Virginia's stance on not allowing the federal government to be involved in the state's hemisphere of control. This stance reflected the sentiment of many states at this time, as conservatism support increased. On top of this, at this time, there was a concern over promoting assimilation or multiculturalism. Many believed that bilingual education would be promoting multiculturalism, whereas ESL would be promoting assimilation. As a result, FCPS supported ESL in order to mainstream immigrant children in order to promote assimilation and counteract multiculturalism. The historical significance lies in what this tells us about the rise of conservatism in the 1980s. One of the characteristics of conservatism was the advocacy of states' rights and belief that the federal government should have as minimal interference as possible in various issues, including education. However, the rise of an age of conservatism led to the election of President Ronald Reagan, which completely turned over the federal government's support towards bilingual education, and instead recentered its stance on supporting states' rights. However, conservatism was not only focused over the issue of states' rights, but were also concerned with the preservation of American culture that was exemplified through the debate over bilingual education as well. This is because many Americans believe that bilingual education will be welcoming multiculturalism into the US, and eventually the English language and American culture would disappear over time. Thus, many Americans supported alternatives to bilingual education, like ESL, as they thought it would assimilate immigrants rather than support multiculturalism, so it would protect their cultural dominance over other groups. This idea of keeping the area, quote, American through assimilation highlights the rise of conservatism in Northern Virginia and its subsequent effect on education. This disagreement towards not only bilingual education, but multiculturalism as a whole in the U.S. exemplifies how the American people at the time felt towards immigration, which correlates to the movement conservatism. Thank you.